Dear YouTube, as you know, under copyright law, I am allowed to use portions of copyrighted material, in this case, copyrighted material belonging to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, so long as this is used for the purpose of criticism and parody. Please remember this when Watchtower comes complaining, because I've embarrassed them by using their propaganda in a way they disapprove of. Thank you. Hello and welcome to my rebuttal of the February 2017 JW Broadcasting episode. If you've been following my rebuttals to these episodes, you'll notice that there is a considerable gap, a 6-month gap, where there are no rebuttals at the moment. That gap begins in August 2016 and ends in January 2017. My plan is to resume filming rebuttals for the current months and then go back as time permits and try to fill in some of the missing episodes. Hence, this will be JW Broadcasting number 29, but I am going to go back as time permits and film JW Broadcasting 23, 24, 25, and so on. Anyway, without further ado, let's get on with it.
You and I make a lot of decisions every day. Now, some have a little impact on our lives, others have a very big impact. And we can appreciate that we can make choices and decisions for ourselves. Think of how life would be if you made no decisions for yourself. Someone tells you when to go to bed. They pick out your clothes, and they tell you what to do for work. Well, none of us would like that. Jehovah gave each of us free will. And that's the precious gift of making choices for ourselves.
Okay, free will. Where do we begin on this? First of all, it's very odd to hear Watchtower telling Jehovah's Witnesses that they can decide on everything. Everything is their decision, especially for Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm going to argue that the same is true to some extent for religion in general, but especially for Jehovah's Witnesses. You cannot argue that they have free will and can make their own decisions. And even in some minute aspects of their lives, they are denied free will and they are denied the ability to make their own decisions on fairly simple things, which I'm going to return to later in this video, because what this guy is saying gets even more outrageous and unrecognizable from my experience as a Jehovah's Witness. But free will, here's the thing, and I'm going to try not to offend too many religious people when saying this. You can't say that God has given humans free will if it comes with strings attached. The moment there are strings attached, the moment it stops being free will. So if God creates you and says, I'm giving you free will, but actually, if you don't use that free will to worship me, things will go very bad. That is not free will, but that is in essence what Christians believe. And you are entitled to believe that. I just think it's important to be honest and not call something free will when it isn't.
Now, have you ever thought about why Jehovah gave us this gift? I mean, why trust us with free will when he knew that we could make bad choices or decisions? Well, one powerful reason is love. The only way to give us the gift of love is also to give us the gift of free will. The two are tied together. You really can't have one without the other. For example, if I program my computer to give me a message every day at 2 p.m., John, I love you. I think you're a wonderful guy. I think there'd be a little something wrong with me if I thought, oh, isn't that nice? My computer, it loves me. Yeah, love only exists if it comes truly from a free will expression.
Here's the thing. If you find yourself in a relationship where someone demands or insists that you love them and actually extends punishments if you fail to love them or fail to show your love for them, the chances are you're in an abusive relationship.
Now, did Jehovah place any boundaries on free will? Yes, they were stated in the law to the nation of Israel. And Jesus later repeated them at Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 40. He said to him, "You must love Jehovah your God with your whole heart and with your whole soul and with your whole mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. The second, like it, is this: you must love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments, the whole law hangs and the prophets." So our use of free will has love of God and love of neighbor as its boundaries.
I'm actually glad that John Ekrann has read this scripture in Matthew 22, because this scripture, thinking back to my childhood as a Jehovah's Witness, this is one of those scriptures where no matter how much I thought about it, I just could not wrap my head around it. You would constantly hear it read out at the meeting. You need to love Jehovah with your whole heart, your whole soul, and your whole mind. And I just couldn't get my head around how that was possible. I'm thinking, well, I love my parents. I love my sister. These are people who I've met at least, and, have a reason to have affection for them. How do I kind of push them aside, because it has to be my whole heart? How do I push them aside and make it so that all of my love is directed at someone I've not met? And I can remember quizzing my parents on this, particularly my mother, and bless them, they tried to explain it to me, but they could never explain it to me in a way that made sense. So I find it interesting that John Ekrann has read that scripture, and also notice how, again, he's setting boundaries. He keeps doing this circle thing during this part of his speech. And what he means by boundaries is strings attached. Free will comes with strings attached in a religious context. And in this context, he's talking about love of God and love of neighbor. What that really means is obeying Watchtower. And I'm going to explain more about why that is the case as we proceed.
Notice, for example, what people are doing in this picture, both inside the circle, boundary, and outside. See, free will allows us to do any of the things we see in the picture. But love of God and love of neighbor move us to reject what's outside the circle and choose to do the kinds of things that we see inside the circle.
Especially if you've never been one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you're just curious about the religion, I feel this artwork that we're being asked to look at is extremely helpful in giving outsiders an insight into what it means to be a Jehovah's Witness. So let's just look at the artwork, and you'll notice that in the top right hand corner you have a young couple smoking and drinking. Below them, in the bottom right hand corner, you've got two guys in a fight, one throwing a punch. In the top left hand corner, you've got someone who looks like might have stolen some money. And in the bottom right hand corner, it's not easy to make out what's going on, but I would suggest that there is some kind of argument going on. So basically, everything on the outside of this circle is bad. Everything is selfish and evil and angry and aggressive and very unpleasant. Whereas everything inside the circle, you've got people reading, you've got people praying, people enjoying themselves, people just, in a nice relaxed atmosphere. So this is quintessentially, this piece of artwork shows at a glance the us versus them, black and white cult thinking of Watchtower and of, by extension, Jehovah's Witnesses. Because what this artwork is saying is that if you are not a Jehovah's Witness, if you don't play by the rules, if you don't give your life over to Watchtower and follow a group of leaders in New York, you're really nobody and frankly pitiable, and one of these kind of pathetic wretches that is, outside of the circle. So I actually appreciate John Ekrann showing this artwork because, I don't need to make my argument, it's there. If you're remotely in tune with how cults work and how mind control works, just look at that picture. That can be shown at a presentation for psychologists and anyone who's trying to understand the cult mindset.
Now, to stay within those boundaries, Jehovah gave us a marvelous brain and a built-in conscience. But he also knows we need more help. And that's why he also gave us Bible principles, basic truths from the Bible that can help us to make good decisions. And it can safely be said that any decision we face can be guided by Bible principles.
John Ekrann is here trying to sell the idea that there are no rules. He repeats this, by the way, but this is his kind of easing himself into it. He's trying to get across the idea that if you're a Jehovah's Witness, it's not about rules and regulations. All you need is the Bible and basic Bible principles to guide you, and you have everything then, if you just base everything on the Bible. But in reality, I would argue it's not like that at all. If it was just purely about the Bible, then you wouldn't need the raft of rules that Jehovah's Witnesses have to live by and are penalized regarding if they breach one of those rules. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail later on. But this is just to show you the kind of misinformation that is contained in these broadcasts. He's saying it's all about following Bible principles, but when you look more closely, you find that the rules and regulations that Jehovah's Witnesses live by aren't necessarily based on the Bible. They're more based on kind of tradition and things that have been passed down by a succession of Watchtower leaders.
Now, our Creator Jehovah knows what's best for us. And he also trusts us to make decisions based on Bible principles. Because he knows that when we do that, then we're really truly going to be happy, content, and at peace with him and with others.
Now we're being sold the idea that Jehovah's Witnesses are happy and content because they live their lives by Bible standards. Well, as I've argued in previous videos, you can say a lot about Jehovah's Witnesses. You can, there are enjoyable aspects of being a Jehovah's Witness. It's very rewarding to feel like you're in a community working towards one purpose. It might be a flawed purpose, it might be a purpose that is actually negative, but the actual feeling of, working as a team and having that sense of community can be very fulfilling. But one thing you cannot say about life as a Jehovah's Witness is that it is uniformly happy and content. All you need to do is, ask around in a congregation and ask about people's, mental health. Start probing a little bit under the surface when it comes to things like depression and stress. You will find that so many witnesses are, having to take antidepressants. Not because, well, I suppose in certain aspects it can be more stressful being a Jehovah's Witness because there are more expectations on you. But what I'm trying to argue is that being a Jehovah's Witness in terms of mental health, in terms of happiness, is certainly no better than not being a Jehovah's Witness. You cannot argue that by living by Bible principles, the way Watchtower defines them, you will be a happier person, which is what John Ekrann has just said.
Now, what if an 18-year-old asks you, hey, what's going to happen when I drop this pen? Well, it's obvious he's not been paying attention to basic principles of life. So by us paying attention to Bible principles, we can very quickly see the pattern of love of God and love of neighbor and know the right thing to do without a long list of rules for every situation.
This is the book Shepherd the Flock of God, and in case you're not a Jehovah's Witness, this is essentially an elder's manual that only elders are allowed to have and only elders are allowed to read, and it is essentially a list of rules. It's sorry to completely contradict what John's just said, by the way. It's a list of rules according to which Jehovah's Witnesses can be very severely punished. And just as an example, if you look at chapter 5, you have there determining whether a judicial committee should be formed, and it has a whole list of things that could cause someone to be disfellowshipped or disassociated. Manslaughter is probably an obvious one. You're not allowed to kill if you're a Jehovah's Witness, I'm afraid. But then you've got things like attempted suicide, porneia, brazen conduct, loose conduct, an insolent, contemptuous attitude. Some of the things in here, again, I've mentioned manslaughter. It also mentions, you can be correctly disfellowshipped for child sex abuse. It also mentions rape. But there are other things that are really quite minor. Things like you can be disfellowshipped for smoking. You can be disfellowshipped for being a professional boxer. There really is a long list of rules that Jehovah's Witnesses are required to live by. And just recently, a confidential document was leaked from Watchtower, and it was called the Correspondence Guidelines. And what this guidelines document was a big long list of rules that go into even more detail than the Shepherd book. And these are really things that you would just not know about if you were an ordinary witness, because they're not written in any of the literature. But I'll just give you one example that I mention in my book to do with blood. If you are a farmer and you own animals, you could get in trouble if you allow one of your animals to have blood. It's an animal. It has nothing to do with Christianity or Jesus or the ransom sacrifice. But you could get in trouble for giving that animal a blood transfusion. That's one of the many, many rules that Jehovah's Witnesses have to live by. But if you believe John Ekrann, oh, no, it's not about rules. All you need is the Bible. Jehovah's Witnesses just live by the Bible, and therefore they don't need rules. I'm sorry, it's total rubbish.
Now, we don't need rules for which movies to watch, which songs to listen to, or what clothes we can wear. If we're paying attention when we're reading the Bible, we train our conscience with Bible principles so we can make such decisions without needing a long list of rules.
It certainly should be the case that when it comes to things like what music you listen to, what films you watch, or what clothes you wear, that you should have your own, free will, and you shouldn't need rules regulating what you do in those areas. The problem is that, what John has just said here is unrecognizable from what I know about Jehovah's Witnesses. So I know for a fact that if your body of elders found out that you'd been to see a film that they considered to be violent or sexually explicit, let's say, for example, that a body of elders found out that someone in the congregation had been to watch 50 Shades of Grey, that person would get a shepherding visit. And if they didn't express regret for going to watch 50 Shades of Grey, there would be consequences. They might not get disfellowshipped, but they would get removed from privileges. They wouldn't be allowed to pioneer or anything like that. So there are very much rules, and probably the best example of a hard and fast rule in the areas that John Ekrann has just gone through, namely music, films and clothing, I'm going to show you now a screen grab of the Circuit Overseer Guidelines. Now, this again is a document that ordinary witnesses don't get to see. It's only for circuit overseers and in some cases substitute circuit overseers who, if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, they're slightly above elders in the hierarchy. But here is a rule about clothing, and basically the rule is that if you wear certain types of clothing that displease the elders, you will be banned from preaching. So you can be, and we those of us who follow Jehovah's Witnesses closely know precisely who's behind this. It's Tony Morris and his fixation with tight pants. Because we recently had, I'll just show you a Watchtower article where witnesses were again reminded about the need to steer clear from the evil of wearing tight trousers. I mean, really, that is the level to which the lives of Jehovah's Witnesses are micromanaged. It really shouldn't make a difference how tight someone's trousers are. At least they're wearing trousers. At least they're not turning up at the Kingdom Hall in just their underpants. The main thing is surely that they're clothed. But no. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, the rule book even extends into your choice of what you pull out of the wardrobe. So that's why, again, the picture that's being painted here by John Ekrann bears no relation to what I know to be true about Jehovah's Witnesses.
We could compare our training, our power of reason, to a blind person using a guide dog. Now, an untrained dog would be very helpful to a blind person. It would bark when others were around, for example. However, a dog trained in specific skills is amazingly helpful. The dog knows when to stop at curbs, walk around obstacles that the person might run their head into. A guide dog is also taught a skill called intelligent disobedience. And even if the blind person encourages the dog forward, it won't obey, but it'll pull the person back from danger. Now, it can take a year or more of training for the dog to learn the amazing skills that are so helpful to a blind person. Likewise, our raw, untrained power of reason can help us to a degree. However, it can be amazing if we take the time to train it.
When John Ekrann talks here about training your power of reason, what he's really doing is romanticizing mind control. If you replace everywhere where he talks about training your power of reason, if you replace that with the words being brainwashed, that's essentially what we're talking about. We're talking about someone's authentic self being replaced by a new, they call it the new personality. And, that's a good description because it's not your personality, it's Watchtower's personality. And so when John Ekrann is talking here about training your power of reason, like the way a guide dog is trained, what he's talking about is training yourself to be who Watchtower demands you to be. And what was interesting about that last clip was that he talked about willful disobedience, how that might be required sometimes. And that reminded me of shunning, because when a Jehovah's Witness takes on this new personality, has their behavior modified, they come up against situations where they are demanded to do things that are unnatural. They're demanded to not pick up the phone when a disfellowshipped son or daughter is ringing. They're demanded to not reply to an email from a son or daughter. And that's when this willful disobedience kicks in. Watchtower demands that they go back to their training and remember to kind of pull back in that situation. It's the same thing with blood transfusions. If you are a Jehovah's Witness and you find yourself in a situation where a doctor looks you in the eye and says, "I'm sorry, but you will die unless you receive blood. It's a matter of hours that we have to work with here." You are required to look that doctor back and say, "I'm willing to die." And those, when he's talking about, that willful disobedience, that for me is what willful disobedience is in this context, because you are disobeying your humanity. You are disobeying your human instincts, A, to survive in the case of blood transfusions, and B, to be a father, to be a mother, to be a human in a family context when it comes to shunning.
Now, the skill we want to learn is illustrating, creating a mental picture of an idea or principle to see its real meaning and impact. Now, even if we are not skilled artists, all of us can and do create pictures in our minds. When illustrating, pay attention to things that are similar or like the thing you're trying to visualize. For example, if sin is like debt, then forgiveness is like someone canceling the debt.
Hang on a minute, I thought Ken Flodine told us that sin was like garlic powder.
The sin of Adam tainted our pure relationship with Jehovah. The garlic powder represents inherited sin and imperfection that was passed on to all humans, putting on more layers of garlic powder. This does not immediately damage our relationship with Jehovah, but if we continue to veer away from the leading of God's Spirit, we sadden him. We grieve the Spirit.
Now, saying that sin is like garlic powder may not make any sense at all compared to saying that sin is like paying off debt, but I think it's more fun.
Now, learning to illustrate or visualize takes time and practice.
Time and practice that Ken Flodine clearly hasn't been putting in.
However, it can be one of the most powerful skills we use to train our power of reason. And it can also be quite enjoyable. Try at your family worship to take the principles for a topic and see how many similarities or likes you can come up with. Now, granted, they all won't be amazing, but you may be surprised by the insights that come from seeing something from a new perspective.
Now, I agree that metaphors and analogies are useful when it comes to trying to explain things, but what's missing here is an acknowledgement that A, it's not unique to talking about the Bible, and B, metaphors and analogies in themselves don't prove something to be correct. I could think of a fantastic analogy to describe something, where you're left thinking, "Oh yeah, I can imagine that. Oh wow, yeah, you've really explained it to me." But that doesn't make the thing that I'm describing true. It just means that I've managed to explain my idea. And I think that's something that's lost on the majority of Jehovah's Witnesses, because they go to their meetings and they hear this talk which is laced with these illustrations, because Jehovah's Witnesses, as we've seen here, are trained from a young age to be able to use illustrations. They'll hear an illustration and they'll think, "Oh, well, there you have it. This is the truth," because, just listen to the way that was explained. It was beautifully explained, and there was this illustration, and it all just made perfect sense. The fact that the illustration was used and it fit, the fact that the analogy fit with what the person was saying, doesn't mean that what the person was saying was true.
Next is listed uncontrolled sexual passion. So hurtful desire has now turned from an idea into a strong emotion of passion, causing one to look for an opportunity to fulfill the desire. Next, uncleanness. The previous steps have now led to inappropriate physical contact with another person. Finally, sexual immorality, serious sin. Sexual immorality has occurred between persons that are not married to one another. So, analyzing Colossians chapter 3 and verse 5 can really help us to eliminate not stimulate wrong desires.
Eliminate, don't stimulate. Catchy. So what John Ekrann is doing here is he's demonstrating the merits of analysing a verse. And I just found it interesting that of all the verses he could have chosen, he chose Colossians 3 verse 5. It had to be about sex. It had to be about what you do with your body members and who you do it with. And this, bear in mind that this program is going to be watched by, families, and there are going to be children watching what John Ekrann has just said. I think this perfectly highlights the way that sex is given so much scrutiny, even when you're at a young age. You have it pummeled into you that, sex is only for married couples. And by the way, when we say married couples, we mean married Jehovah's Witness couples. In other words, don't you dare think about marrying someone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness. And the rules that get layered onto someone, in my view, really do a lot of damage. You do not regulate somebody's sex life without causing that person harm, especially to the degree that Jehovah's Witnesses do it. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, are told that they mustn't masturbate. So not only must they not have sex outside marriage, not only must they only marry other Jehovah's Witnesses, but if they fail to find a suitable other Jehovah's Witness to marry, then, sorry, you can't even masturbate. Now, you might be a Christian watching this, and you might think it's perfectly acceptable or understandable that the creator of the universe, the creator of black holes and galaxies and gravity and, life, you might think it's perfectly understandable that such a vast intelligence is so keenly interested in human genitals and what is done with them. You might be fine with all of that. But it's one thing for you to believe that, and it's another thing entirely for you to regulate how other people perceive things. And I feel that what Watchtower does and the way it handles sex and tries to regulate the sex lives of Jehovah's Witnesses, I believe it does a great deal of harm.
So we need to practice the skill of not simply just reading scriptures, but analyzing them until we've learned all that we can. And we can use the many research tools we have to find valuable comments and application.
So as far as John Ekrann is concerned, all you really need to do is analyze the Bible and all will become clear. Actually, that's not all you need to do. You also need to do research in Watchtower publications. So yes, analyze the Bible, but if questions arise, the place to go to is Watchtower publications. And that's crucial because if you read the Bible on its own terms, it's talking about God, it's talking about Jesus, it's talking about the Israelites, it's talking about requirements for Christians. It's not really having a whole lot to say about Watchtower or the governing body. In fact, it doesn't use the phrase governing body. It's not talking about going to kingdom halls or going to Bethel or any of those things. All of those things are superimposed on the Bible. So the Bible taken by itself can be interpreted any number of ways, and that's why we have myriad Christian denominations. But to go from assuming the Bible to be the infallible Word of God to assuming that not only is the Bible the infallible Word of God, but guess what? Jesus came and chose Joseph Rutherford and his colleagues in 1919, and hey presto, made Jehovah's Witnesses his chosen organization on the earth. None of that is found in the Bible. So that's why you absolutely need, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, to read between the two sources, because the Bible is the Bible, but Watchtower publications fill in the bits about, oh, by the way, it's Watchtower's interpretation that you need to follow.
Now, let's consider our third and final skill, balancing. And to do that, let's use a question on the topic of alcohol. What Bible principles could help a couple to decide whether to serve alcohol at their wedding? So what principles and scriptures do you think would help them make a balanced decision?
Yes, if you're watching this video and you happen to not be a Jehovah's Witness and not too familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses and what they believe and how they live their lives, you now know that Jehovah's Witnesses who want to get married, let's go back to what we were saying earlier about sexual repression. Let's assume that boy Jehovah's Witness manages to find girl Jehovah's Witness and the two decide to get married. There are rules that they need to think about even when it comes to their wedding. And even when it comes to their wedding, they need to agonize over whether they can serve alcohol or not. That's what this part of the video is saying, that they need to sit down and have a conversation that goes like this. Should we allow alcohol to be served? What does the Bible have to say on this subject? How can the scriptures be brought to bear on this huge dilemma that we're now faced with? That's what it means to be a Jehovah's Witness. That's the level to which your life is micromanaged. And this is coming from someone, John Ekrann, who just moments before was telling Jehovah's Witnesses that, hey, you don't have to worry about rules. This is a rule-free organization. Apart from the fact that you need to worry about and be paranoid about whether alcohol is served at your wedding.
Now, it doesn't seem that any one principle provides the answer. The couple could simply say, well, Jesus served wine at a wedding, so can we too. However, there's really more to it than that, isn't there? It's clear that a balance of all these Bible principles is needed. Will relatives or others be there who might be prone to overdrinking? Would serving alcohol bother the conscience of many present because of local customs and feelings about alcohol? It's often the case when making decisions that we need to balance several Bible principles, not taking any one principle solely on its own merit.
What he's really saying is that it isn't just about what's written in the Bible, it's also about not offending people. That is essentially what he's saying, because it says in the Bible, try not to offend people, and therefore that one principle opens the door for a perfectly harmless thing, such as alcohol at a wedding, suddenly becoming bad. Because all it takes is for one person to be offended or to have what they would consider to be a genuine reason for offence, and suddenly what should be perfectly normal, perfectly reasonable, suddenly becomes bad, becomes something that should be avoided. That is, in essence, how rules are made among Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not just about what it says in the Bible, it's also about people's feelings and, people's consciences and not offending people. That's essentially the reasoning that's given for beards. It says nowhere in the Bible anything about not having a beard. If anything, it says in the Bible that you should have a beard. But Jehovah's Witnesses say, oh, well, what are the local customs? Would people be offended if someone had a beard? If there's any reason for offense or any reason for, bringing a bad name on Jehovah, then beards should be avoided. It actually says that in the most recent instructions on having beards. So that, for me, demonstrates what this balancing that John Ekrann is talking about is really about. It's about, yes, regardless of what it says in the Bible, how will it affect people's feelings?
So no matter what decisions you're faced with, we encourage you, let Bible principles guide you.
Or more specifically, let Bible principles as interpreted by Watchtower guide you.
We must know Jehovah well. That means knowing his thinking on matters. We should welcome such an examination and make any necessary changes.
So now we have the first part of a two-part dramatization, and straight away you've got there the witnesses at the Kingdom Hall asked to think about their thinking and examine their thinking and make changes to their thinking. If that doesn't scream cult mind control, I don't know what does. Now though, this congregation is going to be reminded of the need to steer clear of bad association.
Bad associations spoil useful habits. As familiar as that principle is, can you think of an area in your life where it's difficult to apply?
Hey, John. I know it's not your usual, but there's no one to entertain those clients tonight, so can you do it? Thanks.
Great.
Oh dear, John's going to have to entertain some clients as part of his job. I think this calls for some thumping pop music to show how worldly and carefree he's becoming.
Till then, it wasn't my usual thing. But I need to support my family. And these aren't really my friends. I can handle it. I think.
We're faced with
No, John, it looks like you can't handle it. It may be in your contract to entertain clients. It may be something that you are literally being paid to do, but it looks like you were having a bit too much fun there.
Are we letting in bad association through social media? Perhaps we can think of another way bad association.
I don't think so. Except for some friends from my old congregation. Wow, they're not doing so well spiritually. But if I stay connected and see what they're doing, maybe I can help them.
Associations can affect us.
Ooh, the dark side of social media. Yes, this girl is being subjected to posts by friends from her previous congregation who aren't doing so well spiritually. So, forget what we were saying earlier about there being no rules and no restrictions on Jehovah's Witnesses. Apparently, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you need to worry if people on your Facebook friends list are saying things that indicate that they're not sufficiently observant of the governing body's requirements.
Or maybe bad association is coming from a place we never expected.
I only join games with witness friends I know. But sometimes, they connect with people I don't know. Who pick games I'm not sure we should play.
Games that shouldn't be played. I'm guessing he's not talking about Tetris or Pac-Man here. So just to recap, there are no rules for Jehovah's Witnesses. You can just base everything on Bible principles. Apart from that rule that says you're not allowed to play in gaming networks with people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. Apart from that rule.
But maybe my friends know them. So they're probably okay.
It's vital that we avoid bad associations.
If you want to, pause the program here. Take the time to write down what you're thinking. Then watch how they each search for Bible principles and train their power of reason.
I thought that talk didn't apply to me. But can I really handle bad association? If I take a stand, I may lose my job. But that's being anxious about tomorrow.
So let's just be clear on this. Jehovah's Witnesses, according to this video, are not allowed to have jobs that require them to be in any kind of social setting with others. So, for example, clients. That's actually a new thing on me. I wasn't aware that the lives of Jehovah's Witnesses are micromanaged to the extent that client hospitality is forbidden for Jehovah's Witnesses, which is basically all this amounts to. If you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're applying for jobs and one of these jobs involves client hospitality, that's bad association. Bear in mind, this is a video in which we've been told that being a Jehovah's Witness doesn't entail lots of rules, that it's all just purely about Bible principles. Already we can see that it clearly isn't just about Bible principles. Bible principles can be taken and twisted and contorted and perverted so that they actually mean something that couldn't possibly have been in the minds of the Bible writers. So that a simple scripture about minding about your associates now entails quitting your job if it involves client hospitality. And the guy there is having to say, oh, well, why be anxious about tomorrow? I may have a family, I may have children who are dependent on me, but hey, I'm willing to lose my job over this. That's the attitude Watchtower wants you to have if you're a Jehovah's Witness.
Jesus said, so never be anxious and say, what are we to eat? Or what are we to drink? Or what are we to wear? Jehovah knows I need a job. And I need to set a good example for when my children face bad association.
Yes, and this guy's children are going to be absolutely over the moon with Daddy when there's no longer money for food on the table, when there's no longer money for new clothes, purely because Watchtower has made its mind up that you are no longer allowed to do client hospitality as a Jehovah's Witness. But never fear if you're a Jehovah's Witness in this situation, because according to this video, Jehovah, the creator of the universe, knows that you need a job. So he's going to just forget for one moment about all the children who are dying of disease and starvation. He's going to forget about the mess in Syria and refugees and people whose homes are being blown up and people who are losing limbs. He's going to just put all that on the back burner for the moment and find you a job.
1 Corinthians 15:33. My friends' posts are getting worse. Their pictures and comments. 2 Timothy 2:16. But reject empty speeches that violate what is holy, for they will lead to more and more ungodliness. I'm letting them share empty speeches with me online.
Not empty speeches online. Usually everything that you see online is so edifying and educational. Seriously, what a great example of a scripture just being plucked from the Bible and made to say something that it couldn't possibly be saying. So you have a verse, a harmless verse in the Bible that talks about empty speech, violating what is holy, and that must mean Facebook posts. That must mean Facebook posts that don't give evidence of someone who is following the governing body. That's the level, again, that your life is micromanaged as a Jehovah's Witness. You now need to be paranoid about who is on your Facebook friends list and what they're posting about. And if they're posting something that doesn't align fully with the expectations placed on Jehovah's Witnesses, you need to think about unfriending or unfollowing them.
I will try to help them while I still can, but following their posts is not the way to do it.
I don't know what's more distasteful at this point. The fact that Jehovah's Witnesses now have rules about social media that are considered so grave and so serious that they need to be spelled out in video form, or the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses are being trained to be so judgmental. That for me is all about judging people and, looking down on them in a very condescending way. I don't like that tone. I'm used to it, obviously, by now, but I don't like the way that Jehovah's Witnesses are being encouraged to think in that way, being encouraged to scrutinize other people's behavior to that degree.
I told Mom what's been happening when I game with my friends. She gave me good ideas on what to look for in the research guide. Christian life, association. Is your recreation beneficial? Who are my companions? It says, who are the ones I want to share my leisure time with? Does he have the same Bible-based values and morals that I have? Good question.
Again, this is just an excellent glimpse into Jehovah's Witnesses. If you happen to be one of my subscribers who is just interested in what goes on in this religion, well, there you have a snippet where a young Jehovah's Witness is basically reminding himself that if somebody doesn't share his Bible values, in other words, his specific beliefs about the theological claims of a leadership in New York, then they're unfit as friends. Young witnesses are being told that they cannot have friends who are not Jehovah's Witnesses.
Psalm 119:63 says, I am a friend of all who fear you, and of those who keep your orders. But if I only know them online, I can't know if they fear Jehovah.
Let's just go back to that scripture for a moment. So he reads Psalm 119, verse 63, which says, I am a friend of all who fear you and of those who keep your orders. Now that doesn't say by any stretch, I will withdraw friendship and withdraw association from anyone who isn't one of Jehovah's Witnesses. It doesn't say that. It just simply says, I'm a friend of people who fear God and people who keep his orders. Then Watchtower comes in and says, well, we get to decide who is fearing God, and we get to decide who is keeping God's orders. So if somebody isn't doing things the way we think they should do them, they're not friend material for you. That's the extent to which Bible verses are twisted by Watchtower, so that a very innocent verse is made to say, you mustn't be friends with people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses.
We train our conscience with Bible principles that reveal Jehovah's thinking. There may be several principles needed for our unique problem. But when we find and apply them, we'll enjoy a clean heart and a good conscience.
Again, I don't really need to comment on that. We've just had a video segment where witnesses are being told to watch how they think and train their conscience. These are all romanticized ways of saying, if your mind isn't the way we want it to be, you need to change your mind. You need to change your personality. You need to change who you are. It's brainwashing. It just is. The only really disturbing thing is that when you're a Jehovah's Witness, that's not how you see it. You watch this video and think, oh, what a marvelous reminder of ways that we can avoid bad association and improve and hone our Bible-trained conscience. You don't look at it and think, I'm being controlled.
The important thing is that by training our power of reason, we're aligning our thoughts with Jehovah's thoughts.
Or more specifically, aligning your thoughts with Watchtower's thoughts.
Did you see the 3 skills in use? The young brother was able to visualize his potential friends. He couldn't see them literally, but knowing they didn't fear Jehovah or keep his orders painted a picture of the kind of associates they might prove to be.
Think about what John Ekrann is saying here. He is shamelessly saying that this young witness should paint a picture in his mind of how terrible people are, even though he's not met them and doesn't know their personalities. John Ekrann is saying that this young witness should assume the worst, should think that just because they're not Jehovah's Witnesses, they are terrible people. That's what I'm not exaggerating, that is what John Ekrann has just advised. So again, it speaks for itself. If you want to know what it means to be a Jehovah's Witness and the training, the indoctrination that witnesses are subjected to when it comes to black and white mentality and assuming the very worst of everyone who isn't a witness, just watch that clip again and let the words sink in.
And the family head balanced his family responsibilities by applying the principle at Matthew chapter 6, verse 31, where Jesus said not to be anxious over material things. And we can imagine him trying to work the matter out with his boss while trusting Jehovah to care for him and his family, no matter what might happen to his job.
I don't think there is anything balanced about encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to give up their jobs or to consider giving up their jobs if these jobs entail corporate hospitality, which is what we've just seen. And yet here John Ekrann is saying, oh, you know, it's a balance thing. It's all about balance. And, you know, he can have a discussion with his boss. And even if it, you know, results in him losing his job, he knows that that Jehovah will give him a new job. That is not balanced thinking at all. And frankly, it's extremely arrogant to assume that you are such a focal point in creation and so important to the creator of the cosmos that global suffering and famine and war should be put to one side so that the creator of the universe can find you a job that will conform to the requirements placed on you by your spiritual leaders. It's extremely arrogant thinking.
Growing up in the truth, I felt like I fit in more with my friends at school or people who weren't witnesses. I was living a double life and I knew it. I was not baptized. I had always tried to make the truth fit in with the world. And this time I decided I just want to give the world a shot and see what that's like. I came right to my parents and I said, I want to move to LA and pursue modeling. I had my first job within the week. It looks so glamorous.
So what we have here is a propaganda segment, and this is actually part of a series apparently called Truth Transforms Lives. And the objective here is to, you know, remind witnesses of how beneficial and transformative the truth is, and how foolish it would be to turn one's back on the truth, and how important it is to return to Jehovah and that kind of thing. But what really it is a very cynical play on emotions, as we're going to see later. This young girl who is subjected to indoctrination as a child but doesn't end up getting baptized. She can't forget her indoctrination and ends up coming back to the witnesses. Very fortunately for her, she was again never baptized, so that she didn't face punishments for what she did while she was in the world. But it's the way it's put together is so manipulative, and maybe you have to be outside of Watchtower indoctrination to see it for what it is. I can imagine witnesses watching this segment will be completely amazed by it and thinking, oh, well, there you go. This has to be the truth. Look at how emotional she is. How wonderful, you know, her reconciliation with her beliefs. this, make no mistake, is a very cynical propaganda.
There's a lot of parties, going to the coolest houses, getting to hang out with celebrities. There are no rules. You have the money to do whatever you want. That lifestyle was so far from what I was raised knowing as right that I basically had no relationship with Jehovah. Once all the smoke and mirrors are gone, you see these things for what they are. I remember I called my mom and I told her, it's like Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm literally in the middle of it all. And I thought, like, this is it. This is what everyone says is the best. And I'm not happy. And I just felt so dull, empty.
The message here is that if you're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, or if you step outside the Jehovah's Witness bubble, your life will be empty and meaningless and full of degradation and sin and, purely self-serving. That, again, we're seeing that image that we saw before where we had the circle and everyone inside is happy and fulfilled and everyone outside is pitiable and angry and aggressive. Well, it's the same thing here. It's very black and white, us versus them mentality. Obviously, if you want to have a lifestyle reminiscent of Sodom and Gomorrah where anything goes, that is available to you. But also available to you is a meaningful, fulfilled life where the object of your life is not just to serve yourself, but to serve others as well. There are good people doing important, fulfilling work in the world. It's not just a case of selflessness and righteousness and goodness in Jehovah's Witnesses and evil and selfishness and deprivation in the world, but that's the picture that Watchtower wants to paint with this propaganda.
I actually thought to myself, I wish I was never raised a witness. I wish I never even knew Jehovah existed.
Actually, when I look back, and I have given this a great deal of thought, I can't bring myself to say, I wish I was never raised a witness. I'm actually in a way glad I was, because it's given me something meaningful to contribute through my activism work. I wouldn't be able to do my activism work if I hadn't had that experience. So I'm grateful in a way of having a negative that I can turn into a positive. But as regards Jehovah being real or not, well, let's see the proof. I mean, if Watchtower wants to tell us that not only is God real, but also his name is Jehovah, and he has selected a religion on earth to be the sole custodians of spiritual truth, let's see the evidence. I'm happy to see the evidence, but unfortunately, it's missing in this video.
One of the jobs I got hired to do was work for this young fashion company. In between different outfits and shoots, you would, you talk with the photographer. So what are you guys gonna be for Halloween?
Matt doesn't celebrate Halloween. He's not a Jehovah's Witnesses.
So am I.
It's not a joke.
No, I'm not. I mean, I was raised as a witness.
Yeah, I was raised as well.
Do you go to meetings?
No, I haven't been in forever. What about you?
No, no, I haven't.
Awkward. I find this little exchange interesting though, because you've got the photographer and the girl who both realise that they were both raised as witnesses, but you see the body language and the photographer, looking down, and he's ashamed that he's no longer going to meetings, or at least that's the vibe I'm getting. Again, very subtle but very effective in conveying a message that, shame on you if you A, stop associating with Jehovah's Witnesses, but B, stop going to meetings, and if you abandon Jehovah, shame on you. It's very subtle, but it's definitely there, and it will definitely have an effect on witnesses watching this.
I got a last-minute job to New York. I decided to walk the Brooklyn Bridge. I knew Bethel was there, and I'd never been to Bethel. A sister stopped me on my tour, and she invited me up to her office. There were different paintings of the resurrection. She asked me, do you know why the people are waiting on the balcony? And I was like, I don't know. Why? And she said, because they're waiting for their loved ones to be resurrected. It was as if something just went straight to my heart. I've never felt something like that. I had for the first time actually seen the resurrection and believed it. It wasn't just this thing that might happen. It was for sure. I knew exactly what it was going to look like. I would be standing there on that balcony looking for my loved ones to come back. And I wanted to be there. The resurrection was so real to me.
Well, that's what I was talking about earlier, the overt emotional manipulation and tears and melodrama. I mean, I say melodrama, I'm sure that this girl, I'm sure her tears are genuine. I'm sure that's not just all acting. She seems like just a genuinely deluded, albeit nice and, you know, harmless young lady. But her delusion and her emotional vulnerability is used to sell the resurrection. Nothing that she saw in that painting represented proof of the resurrection as it's taught by Jehovah's Witnesses. All she saw was an artist's rendering of what the paradise and the resurrection is supposed to look like. That is not proof of the resurrection. Her feelings are not proof of the resurrection. Her tears, her emotional trauma, none of that is proof of the resurrection. What's sickening about the resurrection teaching, and this cuts very personal to me, if you read my book, you'll know what I'm talking about. But what's sickening is the way that death and grief and bereavement is used as currency by Watchtower, as leverage in bringing people in bringing people back in this case. They dangle the carrot of, oh, well, don't you want to see your loved ones again? Don't you want to see your dead mother again, your dead father again, your dead brother, your dead sister? Well, in that case, you're going to have to not just be a Jehovah's Witness, but be as close to the center of Jehovah's Witnesses as possible. You need to be a pioneer, you need to be giving everything, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be reunited with your dead loved ones. It's a sickening, sickening ploy, but it works very, very well. It worked with me for a number of years. It's worked in this case, but just because this girl is crying and tearful and emotional doesn't make any of it true.
The second I got out of Bethel, I called my mom and I told her instantly, I said, Mom, I'm coming back. I know exactly what I need to do. I'm coming back to Jehovah.
That's a phrase that really grates on me, coming back to Jehovah or returning to Jehovah, because we have the brochure titled Return to Jehovah. Watchtower has mastered the art of blurring the lines between the organisation and the God, so that they're more or less the same thing. If you return to Jehovah's Witnesses, you're returning to Jehovah.
I had made up my mind, I'm going to give Jehovah a chance. But, I'm coming back to truth. I'm going to do it right. There was an elder who was doing the Watchtower, and he just came off so kind that I thought, when this meeting ends, I want to talk with him, and I'm going to explain to him why I'm here. I knew I had so many changes to make. Matthew 6:33 is so important to me. Seek first the kingdom. My entire life, I sought everything else before Jehovah. I never put him first. And I, for the first time, was saying, okay, Jehovah, I'm going to put you first.
Luckily for this girl, she never got baptized. So by the sounds of things, she did things while she was in the world that she could be disfellowshipped for. But because she'd managed to avoid getting baptized before she left the truth, she got away with it. She could just come back, attend a few meetings, take an elder to one side and say, I've done X, Y, Z. And the elder could just say to her, well, are you baptized? No, I'm not. Oh, well, in that case, just have a Bible study and make sure you cut out all of that stuff you were doing before. She would just be treated in the same way as someone who started attending the meetings who'd never been a witness before and had lived accordingly, had lived free from witness restrictions. So this girl, incredibly fortunate, but don't think for a minute, if you happen to be a young Jehovah's Witness or someone who was raised as a witness, watching this, who's contemplating going back, don't think for a moment that that's how it's going to be for you. Because if you were baptized before leaving and you go back, you are going to have to go through a reinstatement process, which involves sitting at the back of the meetings and basically being shunned by an entire congregation for months before you are, allowed to be treated as a normal human being. That's the reality, and it's not really conveyed here.
The job I have right now isn't necessarily my dream job, but it allows me to do exactly what I want to do for Jehovah, and that's pioneer. I used to walk down Hollywood Boulevard going from casting to casting with my portfolio in hand, and now I walk down Hollywood Boulevard with a cart in my hand. Out in the ministry, I see models that I used to work with, and I love getting to show them this is my new life, and this has changed my life. I am so happy. I know what it's like to superficially feel good, but to literally have the joy, the happiness, I want to share that with everybody. Jehovah completely changed my life.
We're so happy that Sister Zelina returned and dedicated her life to Jehovah.
I really do feel sorry for Zelina. She's given up a promising career as a model for basically acting as a pro bono publicity agent for a cult. I also feel sorry for her that this delusion that she has is being so cynically exploited and manipulated by Watchtower to influence other young Jehovah's Witnesses to make the same mistakes that she made. But that unfortunately is the reality of Watchtower in the 21st century. It used to be that you'd need to read about this experience in a yearbook or in a Watchtower magazine. Now it's in high definition video with stirring music and with crying and tears, and it's so much more manipulative and coercive than anything that could have been put in words on a page. So we're really ramping up the propaganda to a scale I've never seen before, and I can imagine lots of young witnesses will fall for this hook, line and sinker.
Young ones, please know that Jehovah does not want to hold you back from having fun. And He doesn't want you to feel guilty for the desire to use your talents and to enjoy life. But He does want to protect you from spiritual dangers. And He asks you to seek first the kingdom in these last days.
And when we're talking about seeking first the kingdom, what we're really talking about is putting life opportunities and careers on hold for the benefit of a leadership in New York. They come first. I think out of everything that you see on JW Broadcasting videos, the thing that most upsets me and the thing that most angers me, frankly, are these segments where young people are directly targeted. It's one thing to make material that's aimed at adults who should be able to think critically, but to aim material at young people who don't have their critical thinking faculties as finely honed, who are more vulnerable and more open to suggestion, I think that's just plain evil.
Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 22 puts it well. It is the blessing of Jehovah that makes one rich, and He adds no pain with it. It is Satan's system that adds any pain we may experience. Sister Zelina and so many others have found that scripture to be true. So often, young ones who choose to give Jehovah their best are blessed with ways to use their talents and interests in sacred service.
We're now being asked to accept that if you are not a Jehovah's Witness, you are in pain. You're in a painful situation. And young people like Zelina who leave If they have any kind of problems, well, that's the pain being added by Satan's system. But once you become a Jehovah's Witness, you're pain-free. Again, we're seeing this black and white partition being raised between Jehovah's Witnesses and non-Jehovah's Witnesses, and this real paranoia being kindled and being nurtured so that everything outside of the organization is painful and pitiable, but everything inside Jehovah's organization is wonderfully happy and blissful and purposeful.
Well, what is it that helps all of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide to be so united and not to be involved with the wars of this world? Well, one of the things that helps us is our Christian neutrality. What do we mean by neutrality? We mean not taking sides in political issues. Of course, we take sides with Jehovah and the kingdom, but with regard to worldly political debates and issues that arise, we don't take sides.
Unless, of course, it's the United Nations, and there's an opportunity for Watchtower to be a secret member of the United Nations without Jehovah's Witnesses knowing about it. Honestly, the hypocrisy of this. I obviously touch on this subject in my book about the 9-year affiliation between Watchtower and the United Nations. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this video and you're completely unaware of the subject, please do some research on it. There's a really good JW Facts article on Watchtower and the United Nations NGO affiliation. I've also done a video called Watchtower and the United Nations, An Unexpected Affair, I think is the title, where I've tried to, create a summary of what we know and the letters and the evidence and that kind of thing. But what you have when you're talking about Christian neutrality, what you have is a history of hypocrisy with Watchtower. I mean, even the earliest presidents, I think Knorr and Rutherford, both signed oaths of allegiance to defend the Constitution of America. Neutrality in the history of Jehovah's Witnesses has always been something that applies to the rank and file, to individual Jehovah's Witnesses, but it can be very selectively applied. And when it comes to the leadership, they're almost completely immune and they can basically do whatever they want.
What are some of the things that perhaps could erode our neutrality? Well, maybe we could mention 3 things this morning. One is the propaganda that the world puts forward. Now, we have seen what the media says about Jehovah's Witnesses, haven't we? How distorted some of their reports are and how they can paint a negative picture with regard to us.
If you happen to be a Jehovah's Witness watching this video, first of all, well done for making it this far through a very long video. But secondly, I'd like you to think about the treatment that Jehovah's Witnesses receive by the media. I would just ask you to think about it. If you were in a cult, wouldn't it make sense that there would be negative publicity? Just imagine you were a Scientologist, or just imagine you were a member of the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. How would you respond? What would your leaders be saying about negative media if you were in one of those organizations? Wouldn't they be saying more or less the same thing? Oh, well, the world's out to get us because we have the truth and they know it and they're trying to thwart our efforts. That's exactly what you hear people in other cults saying. So it's no surprise at all that Jeffrey Jackson here is telling Jehovah's Witnesses to ignore negative media.
Well, should we expect that they are neutral with regard to other events that they report on, particularly when there are conflicts between 2 nations? The media in one particular nation may promote certain ideas about the other nation. We may be affected by that. We may be surprised, perhaps, to visit some other countries that have a different political ideology and be surprised to see how things perhaps were a little different in that country to how it's portrayed by the media in our country. So we need to be careful not to be influenced by the propaganda of this world, particularly media reports and so on.
So what Jeffrey Jackson's trying to do here is actually very clever. We're sort of seeing, if you'll excuse me, Trump supporters, we've sort of seen the same thing with Donald Trump, with him labeling anything that paints him in a negative light as fake news. Oh, that's fake news, that's propaganda. Well, we're seeing the same thing here. Anything that paints Jehovah's Witnesses in a negative light must be propaganda. It must be biased. Well, yes, there is media bias. Sometimes a certain newspaper or a certain news organisation will be reporting from a certain perspective. That's certainly true. Having said that, the facts are the facts, and if it's a responsible newspaper or it's a responsible journalist writing an article, they will be compelled to report based only on the facts, and they will also be compelled to allow the maligned party, the party that is kind of suffering as a result of the coverage, their opportunity to say something. And what's interesting is, if you look at, again, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, I would encourage you to bring up one of the articles about child abuse. You could more or less pick any article by any reputable news organisation that touches on child abuse. You will nearly always find that Jehovah's Witnesses are given the opportunity to put their side across. You will nearly always find that. And what you will also find is that they will just give a blanket statement that goes something along the lines of, oh, well, Jehovah's Witnesses view child abuse as abominable and as a crime, and they don't tolerate it in any form. And it's just a blanket statement. They don't give any answers to the specific case or the specific victim that's being talked about. They just basically dismiss everything and say, nothing to see here, folks, move on. So the reality when you look at the media coverage of Jehovah's Witnesses is that actually it's very fair and unbiased, but typical of any cult or any cult-like or narcissistic group or movement. It's typical that they would want to stigmatize the media and paint it in a bad light.
What's another thing perhaps that could cause us to lose a measure of neutrality? Sporting events.
Ah yes, the evil that is sporting events. Honestly, leave it to Watchtower to find some way of creating paranoia over something as harmless as a sporting event.
Sometimes sporting events are able to achieve certain goals with regard to nationalism. We see the national anthem being played, many of these events. It reminds me, many years ago, when I was in a different country, a friend of mine asked me to record a certain sporting event. I wasn't particularly interested in the event, but because he made this request, I recorded it. And of course, I wanted to make sure that I'd got the last 10 minutes of it. I thought our friendship may be strained if I didn't get the actual last part of the game. When I watched it, it was absolutely exciting, nail-biting finish. Well, after the brother gave me back the videotape, I thought maybe some of the other brothers who would be interested in this sporting event may want to have it rather than just wipe the tape. So I offered it to several. And each one of them said to me, no, thanks. If we had won, perhaps it would be different. Now, what was the problem? As I said to them, were you watching the game or were you taking sides? An interesting concept, because here 2 different nations were involved. So we have to be careful that even sporting events don't stir up within us certain nationalistic feelings. And perhaps we could take sides with regard to certain events.
This touches a nerve with me because I am a sports fan. Even when I was a witness, I was really into football. You Americans would call it soccer. I really loved it. I enjoyed playing it and I enjoyed watching it. And obviously, when you are a football fan, you are interested in the national tournaments. You're interested in my case, the European Championships and the World Cup. And when you're watching the World Cup, if you're English, you're going to root for England. It's just the way it is. But here, Jeffrey Jackson is trying to say, oh, well, that's a possible breach of Christian neutrality. You know, if you're watching a football match, You should just watch it purely for the excitement of not knowing who's going to win. The moment you start rooting for one team, you're taking sides, and taking sides is wrong. You know, listen, we started this video with John Ekrann saying, oh, well, you know, we don't need to come up with loads of rules. We can just base everything on Bible principles. We don't need a long list of rules. Well, there's another rule. There's another rule right off the bat, that you can't support your national football team. Where does it say that in the Bible? Where does it say that Jehovah's Witnesses who live in England can't, you know, root for the English national team? Doesn't mean that they think that England is the best nation, that everyone should really be English. That, you know, I was not watching the England team with those sorts of sentiments at all. You know, there's things about the history of my country that I'm deeply ashamed of. Things about the present of my country that I'm ashamed of. I don't believe that my nation or my nationality is superior. It's just familiar to me because I'm English, because I watch the English Premier League and I know the players. And I want to see how those players perform against players from different countries. It's fascinating. And you do feel gutted if your team gets knocked out, or elated if your team wins. Those are just perfectly, you know, what could be more harmless than that? But even in this area, Watchtower manages to find a rule. Watchtower manages to find some way of making witnesses feel paranoid.
The third area that perhaps could erode our neutrality are the political promises being made, particularly at election time. Perhaps one of the candidates is from our ethnic background, or perhaps is the same gender as we are. When we look at the political situation these days with many elections, it seems to be more in the form of entertainment than anything else, with music and very colorful characters. But if we were to say in our heart, I hope that idiot doesn't get into power, are we neutral? Or worse still, if we say, I hope the other person gets into power, well, we need to be careful, don't we?
Was that a bit of a dig at Trump, Jeffrey? Again, you have this fostering of paranoia over something that is A, essentially harmless, and B, not really regulated by the Bible. I mean, obviously Jesus said, my kingdom is no part of this world. But that wasn't in itself a prohibition against people voting and against people engaging in the political process. And it's only through engaging in the political process and having your say as a citizen that the country can move forward. And the things that witnesses benefit from, such as, you know, local infrastructure, police departments, hospitals, you know, fire departments, all of those things, you know, education, schools, all of those things are regulated to some degree by government and administrations that get voted into office. And there is nothing to be ashamed of in being a part of that process.
So, brothers and sisters, let's work hard at remembering that we're no part of this world. We support the best government that could ever rule this earth. And by doing so, we will keep our neutrality and we will keep our unity.
Yes, we should all look forward to Jehovah's government, which will bring an end to evil and suffering by massacring everybody who's not a Jehovah's Witness. It's sort of a case of the ends justifying the means.
The next day, we have to go for working. We had so strong to work from morning in summertime. From 5 o'clock, we were on the roll call place till evening, 7 o'clock. Then the quarantine came. We have no to go out. They closed the door. They give us our meal through the window, and we have fine time to have rest. We encourage one another with spiritual interests. And the doctor came, knocked the window. Who died in your barrack? Nobody. No one. Our old weak sisters, they overcome all. Never somewhere became sick. So it was a good witness for the other in the camp.
This is one of those extremely subtle elements of JW Broadcasting propaganda that you can easily miss if you don't think about it. So you have here this Sister Potzinger, who's no longer with us, but this is an archive interview, and she was in a concentration camp as a Jehovah's Witness in Nazi Germany. Very commendable that she made it through. She looks like she was a lovely lady. But I must just raise issue with this story that's being told here, because it seems to have been included to give the impression that this group of Jehovah's Witnesses were miraculously spared from any deaths due to disease. Even if we take this story at face value and assume that all of the other buildings had inmates who died and Jehovah's Witnesses somehow had no fatalities at all, that doesn't prove the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses, but that's essentially why this story is included. It's to create this aura and this legend. You can imagine witnesses watching this, looking at each other saying, oh, well, you see, that was Jehovah's hand, clearly. That was Jehovah's intervention that caused the Jehovah's Witnesses in this concentration camp not to suffer any deaths. This sort of thing is really subtle, but it really does work in making Jehovah's Witnesses feel special.
His punishment was to hang for 1 hour on the pail. When I asked my husband, how did you overcome such a torture? Then he said, I was thinking, how was the situation when Abraham had to kill his son? And this was a long way. I was always thinking, what was his thoughts? How had he overcome his feeling and what Jehovah wants for him? And in this way, he didn't feel anymore. After 1 hour, when he came down, the other brothers were saying, you don't look as you have been on the torture stake. So Jehovah can help us in all such situations.
I'm a little bit confused here because I don't want to minimize in any way the suffering that went on in the concentration camps. I've been researching this for my book, and I know that witnesses were brutally persecuted during the Second World War in the concentration camps, and an estimated 1,200 Jehovah's Witnesses actually lost their lives in this period. But I'm struggling to understand a punishment that entails basically being put on a pole for an hour. It seems rather an odd punishment. I mean, an hour, I can't, unless he's in some kind of pain, I guess then it would be a very difficult punishment, but just being on a pole, strapped to a pole for an hour, I struggle to think of that as, hugely traumatizing. Maybe you needed to be there, and maybe there are specifics that I don't know about. But that aside, I find it interesting that Brother Potzinger, who apparently was a governing body member, he says that he got through it by thinking about the story of Abraham and Isaac. And I just wanted to kind of plant a flag here, because when you do leave religion and you do stop venerating the Bible as the infallible word of God, one thing that you do quickly lose respect for is the story of Abraham and Isaac, because here you have a father who was essentially prepared to kill his son because of voices in his head. So he heard a command which he interpreted to mean you need to sacrifice your son, and he was prepared to do it. Now, if we opened our newspapers tomorrow morning and there was a story saying man kills son because he says God told him to do it, we wouldn't be thinking, oh well, that what an obedient, faithful person this man was. we'd be thinking he needs to be not only punished but treated for severe mental illness. But because this story is in the Bible and it's presented as having huge religious significance and symbolism, religious people are basically encouraged to praise Abraham for doing this. There's nothing praiseworthy about it. If you are a parent, your first priority is the preservation and safety of your children. There is no justification at all for a parent to kill their child. There just isn't. I don't care about symbolism. I don't care about it being a foregleam of the ransom sacrifice. There is never a justification for a parent to sacrifice their child. I realise that in the actual story, Abraham doesn't go through with killing Isaac. At the very last minute, he's told not to do it. But even so, the way this story is put on a pedestal, not just by Christianity, but by Judaism and by Islam as well, they refer to this story. It's not something that anyone should be proud of.
Jehovah's name is the most important part in our life. Nothing is so important like Jehovah's name.
Nothing in life is as important as Jehovah's name, which basically means nothing in life is as important as serving Watchtower. It all amounts to the same thing. Now it's time for another JW Broadcasting music video.
Life's not easy when trouble's around, and the whole situation is getting you down. So-called friends, they just want a reaction. Turn to Jehovah and pray, silently pray.
This music video has so many triggers for me personally, because the issue of bullying at school really affected me when I was growing up as a witness. Again, as you'll read in my book, if you get a chance to read it, it was one of the things that really cemented my conviction as a witness when I was a young kid, was the fact that here I was being persecuted at school, and it was supposed to be that Jehovah's Witnesses would be persecuted, so therefore if I was having a hard time for my beliefs, that meant my beliefs were true. But I just find this music video really repulsive because it's laced with really bad advice. And I'm going to return to the bullying issue later because it's kind of revisited. But we open with this young lad being pushed around by bullies, and the message that's given in the lyrics is, well, just pray about it. Prayer will make everything better. That is terrible, terrible, reckless advice. Praying will not make the bullies go away. All you're doing is raising the child's expectations and giving them false hope that if they say a prayer, everything will work out well.
Don't give up, don't give in. Put your trust in Jehovah. Keep it calm, we can win if we stop, think and pray.
So there's another message to young people in this part of the song, and we see the young kid who was previously being bullied preaching in the playground, showing one of Watchtower's videos to a schoolmate. So the message there is, and it's a message that's given fairly consistently to young witnesses, is your school is your personal territory. So when you go to school, you're not going just to learn, you're going to teach others. It's your opportunity to bring in more converts from your fellow classmates. That's the attitude that witnesses are given. And in this situation, we have a young kid who's being bullied, and the message from Watchtower is, oh, well, don't give up, don't give in. show your classmates Watchtower materials. That will make things better. No, it makes things much, much worse. Take it from me as someone who was preaching in the playground. It does not make your situation easier in terms of bullying when you're going round trying to convert your classmates.
Never doubt, never fear. Put your trust in Jehovah, and our road will be clear if we stop, think, and pray.
I just wanted to highlight this idyllic family scene that we have with the mother, presumably a single parent, and her 2 children. And the message here is, oh well, Jehovah's Witnesses are pro-family. Look how tight-knit this family is. And I was just watching that part of the music video thinking, what happens when this young lad wakes up, or the young daughter, when they're a teenager, wakes up and realizes it's all a load of nonsense? Will they still be eating together then? Will they still be a close-knit family full of love and happiness and smiles at that point? The truth is that Jehovah's Witnesses are not remotely pro-family due to the shunning policy.
When we're weak, we are strong, and we'll see where He was by our side. He has been our guide all along. Always stop, think.
So this brings us back to the bullying. And one of the bullies who was pushing this kid around at the beginning of the music video, there's a bit of a standoff between them, and the kid gives the bully a leaflet, because that's going to make everything so much better, isn't it? If you encounter bullies in the schoolyard who are making your life a misery because you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, what will make things better is if you preach to them. Take it from me as someone who's been in this situation, I can assure you that preaching does not make bullying go away. It only makes things worse. And I personally think it's extremely irresponsible and negligent of Watchtower, from the comfort and safety of their writing department, to be pushing out material that puts witness children in such peril. Because let's face it, there's a lot at stake here. Young witness kids in that situation can get physically abused if they make the wrong decision. But as far as Watchtower is concerned, oh well, what's most important is Jehovah's name and preaching at every opportunity. So even if there's a chance that this kid might get physically assaulted, we're going to encourage him to hand out leaflets to school bullies.
Jehovah will always bless us when we go to Him in prayer with our concerns. Whatever the situation, He can give us the power beyond what is normal.
The power beyond what is normal. That will get you through any situation. Let's say you're a father who is contemplating whether to give up your job because it involves client hospitality and you're afraid of bad association. Well, don't be afraid. Give up your job, because the power beyond what is normal will come to the rescue and give you a new job. This, unfortunately, is what being a Jehovah's Witness is all about. If you can believe in the power beyond what is normal and mystical protection from God in all areas of life, you can believe in pretty much anything. So those were my thoughts on the February 2017 JW broadcasting episode. As I said earlier, I will try to stay on top of these rebuttals so that next month in March I do a March rebuttal, and if I have time in between, I'm going to try and go back and fill in the gaps with some of the previous episodes. But I do feel it's important to give some kind of answer to this propaganda, because even though as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, we may watch it and think, how could anyone believe this? How could anyone be duped by this? The truth is that when you are a Jehovah's Witness and you're inside and you're in the indoctrination, this stuff is extremely powerful. Especially when I started doing these rebuttals, I think I was a little bit too blasé about the actual impact that they have on Jehovah's Witnesses. I just assumed that because they look ridiculous to me, as an awakened witness, they must look ridiculous to Jehovah's Witnesses who are forced to watch them every month. But I had an interesting experience recently on a trip to, well, you saw my trip to the UK. And during that trip, I met up with somebody who ordered one of my books on Indiegogo, who is a recently awakened witness, who at the time was still going to meetings. And one of the questions I was most interested to ask her was, the JW Broadcasting episodes, how are they received by Jehovah's Witnesses? Do they find them hilarious? Do they find them awkward? And she replied and said, oh, they love them. They really love them. And as amazed as I was to hear this, the more I've thought about it since, the more I've thought, yeah, I can imagine still being a Jehovah's Witness and wanting it to be true and wanting to be swept along on this roller coaster of emotion and euphoria. And, you know, we saw before the experience of the young girl who returns to Jehovah. I can actually imagine, now that I really try and think about it and delve into what I was like before, I can imagine connecting with it at some level, which I think is why, you know, there needs to be a conversation, and there needs to be some form of rebuttal, whether it's me, whether it's others. There needs to be people who can stand up and say, excuse me, this is total nonsense. So although frankly it does take a lot of time and effort to put these rebuttals together, I'm going to try and keep on doing them. But I'm afraid that's it for this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos, and as always, thank you for watching.